Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us during this month of Pride for Bridges to Belonging, the future of LGBTQ-inclusive workplaces. I'm so excited for our conversation today with these superlative humans and friends to ADOS. Today, we're going to hear from Kerry Evers and Emily Gallo about essential factors for cultivating workplace belonging for LGBTQ+ employees through lenses of research and practice. But before we do, I want to invite you to use the Q&A function during our session today to share your questions as they come to you. We'll have a bit of time at the end to get Kerry's and Emily's reactions. I want to say a little bit about ADOS and why we work to create spaces like this to bring people together from across disciplines and sectors before we begin. At ADOS, we describe ourselves as a social innovation hub dedicated to advancing LGBTQ+ health. And that word innovation is intentional because we believe that the transformative changes needed to improve health outcomes require new connections and collaborations across industries, sectors, and lived experiences. We believe that knowledge and great work too easily get trapped in silos. So we bring together researchers, clinicians, community organizations, business leaders, and technologists to create new solutions grounded in science, equity, and real-world know-how. Our commitment is to move from conversation to progress. Today, we're gathered to talk about workplace belonging. Before I introduce our esteemed speakers, I want to give a very brief background on the factors that make this topic important. It is likely not news to you that the workplace is changing. Seismic shifts brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic and the nearly instantaneous adoption of artificial intelligence across sectors have and still are reshaping how we work and connect. On top of that, there's the existing loneliness epidemic, which was identified by former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy in 2023. Creating workplace belonging requires facing new and constantly evolving challenges. To get concrete, adoption of remote work brought on by COVID-19 led to lasting changes. Today, 40% of all US workers have a hybrid or fully remote job. 18% of US employees believe that their job will be taken over by AI within the next 5 years. And perhaps an indicator of how these pressures are affecting the workforce, burnout is at an all-time high, with 3 in 5 US employees reporting moderate to severe burnout. These environmental stressors affect how people connect to their work, coworkers, and the organizations they work for. Workplace belonging refers to feelings of being secure, accepted, included, and integral to one's team and organization. A 2025 Gallup poll found that less than 40% of employees felt that someone in their workplace cared about them as a person. And that feeling of belonging is important to people. Another poll found that half of employees would give up a 10% raise for a greater feeling of belonging in this economy. Employers often look at employee engagement, or one's involvement and enthusiasm about their work and workplace alongside belonging. The proportion of employees who experience positive involvement and enthusiasm has shrunk as well, down to just under a third of employees. And 17% of employees report feeling actively disengaged from their work, with greatest declines among the youngest employees, suggesting that workplaces are least able to adapt to new generational trends and employee needs. The story of employee belonging and engagement gets even more nuanced and no easier for marginalized and minoritized employee populations, including LGBTQ employees. A 2025 study painted an illuminating picture of the experiences of LGBTQ+ employees compared to their cisgender and heterosexual peers. Broadly, it found a stark divide between how the two groups experience workplace culture. LGBTQ+ employees report lower ratings of shared purpose, camaraderie, and appreciation. They are less likely to experience their workplaces as respectful, tolerant, or welcoming, and they are more likely to have considered or initiated a job change because of a coworker's behavior. The study is backed up by other research indicating that a lack of safety and trust could be driving these differences in experience. Gone are the days when we were only thought to be 1% or 4% or 7% of the population. Nearly 1 in 10 American adults today identifies as LGBTQ. And that number jumped to nearly 1 in 5 among Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Despite our growing outness in our personal lives, half of LGBTQ employees don't feel safe sharing their identity with their supervisor, and 44% report their workplace to be unsupportive of LGBTQ people. Beyond simple support, LGBTQ+ employees also experience elevated rates of overt discrimination and harassment, reporting higher rates of discrimination in hiring, promotion, harassment broadly, and sexual harassment. Lest some wayward pragmatist ask, so beyond the human rights argument, what's in it for businesses to invest in belonging? Well, on an individual level, increased workplace belonging increases employee skills like problem solving and factors of wellness like life satisfaction. It also decreases challenges to employee well-being, including risks to productivity like burnout, anxiety, and depression. And on an organizational level, belonging drives employee engagement, collaboration, innovation, productivity, and profitability. And it reduces organizational challenges like absenteeism and turnover. And a final bit of context. Few belonging tools have been tested and validated, particularly for those employees most likely to experience worse belonging outcomes. Alongside this lack of tried and true solutions, organizations have to make decisions in a highly charged political climate, where there is at least the perception that investing in employee belonging could introduce risk to the organization. That is why I am so glad to be joined by Kerry Evers and Emily Gallo, 2 wonderful friends of ADOS and accomplished leaders in the space of workplace belonging. They are each going to share with us about their work and perspective, not just on why this is such a crucial topic, but importantly, how organizations should tackle it. I'm going to start by introducing Dr. Kerry Evers and the ProChange team. If y'all would like to join me on stage. Dr. Kerry Evers is co-president and CEO of ProChange Behavior Solutions. Kerry and the ProChange team are nationally renowned for leveraging best practices in behavioral change science to empower people to experience life-changing breakthroughs in well-being. Kerry is the principal investigator on the Bridges study that they will be sharing about. She oversaw the conceptualization and building of a workplace belonging intervention for LGBTQ individuals and the execution of a research trial to test its efficacy. Joining her are Dr. Patty Castle and Madison Gilmore. Dr. Patty Castle is Senior Vice President of Data Science at ProChange Behavior Solutions, where she executes all data management and analyses. In addition, she oversees all research, design, and development. And Madison Gilmore is a research and project manager at ProChange Behavior Solutions. As project manager of the Bridges project, she played a key role in formative research, intervention development, and trial management efforts. Kerry, Patty, Madison, I'm so excited to hear from you about the Bridges program and what you learned about supporting LGBTQ+ employees in cultivating workplace belonging.
Thank you so much, James. We are so happy to be here. I just want to make sure that everyone can see the slides that are up right now. Again, thank you all so much for being here in summer and on, at least where I'm living, an absolutely beautiful day. We really appreciate you being here to discuss such a really important topic. So to start off, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we're going to be sharing today. I'm excited to share the results of Bridges, which stands for Building Connection, Strengthening Belonging. Bridges was developed through a collaboration between the ADOS LGBTQ+ Health Initiative at Penn Nursing and ProChange Behavior Solutions. Our goal was to create a digital intervention that leverages behavior change science to address workplace belonging among individuals with minoritized sexual and gender identities for many of the reasons that James just outlined. Before developing the program, we conducted a series of formative research interviews to better understand the experiences of belonging among LGBTQ+ workers and to identify the factors that contribute to feeling connected, valued, and supported in the workplace. One important thing I want to make note of before we get started is that belonging can be addressed at multiple levels. Organizations can create cultures, policies, and practices that foster belonging, but individuals can also develop skills and strategies that help them navigate challenges and strengthen their own sense of connection. Bridges was designed to address belonging at the individual level. It is not intended to replace organizational efforts at all. Instead, it complements those efforts by helping individuals build resilience, strengthen connections, and increase their sense of influence within the workplace. After developing the program, we conducted a 30-day pilot study to evaluate 3 key outcomes that are outlined on the screen: feasibility, acceptability, and preliminary efficacy. For feasibility, we wanted to determine whether participants would continue receiving text messages and engaging with the online tools. If someone's not going to use the program, there's really no use in continuing to provide it. For acceptability, we wanted to know whether participants would recommend the program to others. And finally, what we'll present today, we wanted to evaluate preliminary efficacy by examining changes in professional fulfillment and related outcomes. So what is the Bridges program? I'm so glad you asked. So the Bridges program combines online learning activities with daily tailored text messages. Participants had access to 4 modules over 4 weeks online. The modules focused on belonging, burnout, resilience, and influence. Although belonging was the primary focus of the intervention and this study, our formative research suggested that belonging is closely connected to other aspects of workplace well-being. One can't exist without the other. People who feel disconnected often also experience burnout, reduced resilience, and diminished confidence in their ability to influence their environment. As a result, we designed a program that addresses all 4 of these areas. Another important feature of the Bridges program was tailoring. So I work in the area of behavior change, and tailoring is a key way that we make sure we're providing the correct communications to a person at the correct time. So participants entered the program with different goals and different levels of readiness to make changes in their workplace and within themselves. Some wanted to focus on improving their own experiences, while others wanted to help create a more supportive environment for their colleagues. To accommodate these differences, select activities within the program that I'll show you were tailored based upon what we called leader readiness, or an individual's readiness to positively influence the workplace experiences of others. Text messages were also tailored. So every week, someone received a few questions by text message that they answered. These answers were then compared to a database and statistical norms that we had established on that specific construct, such as burnout or resilience. And how they scored on those determined which text messages they would get every day. We made sure that within our bank of text messages, that we had messages that would speak to that person based upon their score. So the individual received text messages every day. And then they were offered the ability to go online and further their experience by using the different activities. If they never came back to the program to answer questions, they continued to get text messages based upon the area that they had been working on previously. This was 2-way text messaging, and the responses were used to personalize the messages they received throughout the entire program. The goal was to provide support that felt relevant, timely, and responsive to each person's and participant's unique experience. So I'm going to show a video now, and I'll talk over it for a bit. There is some audio with the video. Hopefully you'll be able to hear. But this is a video of the online portion of the program. So the program allowed people in by using identity management. So they would get a text to their unique phone number and then be able to text that code in. As you can see, there's 4 different areas that they could work on, as I outlined before: belonging, burnout, resilience, and identity. or influence, sorry. There is also an area of support that they can go to at any time, as well as supportive videos that they can use whenever they would like. These were available to everyone. These included things like meditation, gratitude challenges, and other aspects that could help increase their overall well-being. Each section within those 4 weeks started off with a situational judgment training. I'll let you listen to this.
You've been feeling isolated at work and noticed that many of your coworkers are feeling the same way. While your supervisor recognizes this and has tried to do something about it, their solutions continue to fall short. They've been holding weekly team building meetings, but you found these meetings get in the way of your work and don't seem to help you feel more a part of the team. How would you respond to this situation? Reminder, if none of these options represent exactly what you would do, choose the one that comes closest to how you would approach the situation.
These were added based upon a recommendation from one of our leadership consultants who recommended we use situational judgment testing or training, where it's kind of light in this area, but we're basically providing scenario-based multiple choice aspects, presenting a real world challenge to someone and seeing how they would react. We then can tailor our feedback to them. You can see here that each of these cards has a variety of different activities for them during the week. These can include just simple text-based information and knowledge. We also have true-false quizzes and other types of quizzes. We also have these areas where we're asking them to reflect within their own experience on specific situations or challenges that they may face. They can enter these responses, but the responses were not available to anyone else. So this was just purely for their own reflection. We had additional areas where we would present thoughts, feelings, or other situations, and we can provide how they would react to that. The next type of activity was something we call script building. So a lot of times people may know what they want to say, but they don't know how to actually say it, how to ask for support, how to address a specific situation. So we provided them with options within each of the 4 topics where they could select a script, they could edit it themselves, and then send it to themselves so they could have a little bit of a script they could use when moving forward. And lastly, we always ask them to reflect on their mood. Based upon the responses for that day, we gave them some general feedback on how they were dealing with things, where they were, and they could go along and track along with how their mood is doing. So that's the end of the demo. So let's shift a little bit to the research aspects. And we're happy to answer questions on the program after. So in terms of the research, this was a 30-day pilot research study. Participants were recruited through ADOS and ProChange through outreach efforts, including newsletters, emails, and social media. To be eligible for the project, participants needed to be U.S. adults working at least 32 hours per week in health and human services. They needed to report lower levels of workplace belonging and identity specific to the population the intervention was designed to support. As with many online studies at this time, we did face a bit of fraud within our recruitment. It was a significant challenge, but we implemented a combination of automated screening procedures, manual review processes to identify duplicate registrations, and removed participants from outside the United States. While fraud was substantial, it was comparable to what we're finding and many other researchers are finding with online recruitment during this time. Eligibility was also determined based upon identity. This project launched about a year ago, and because of changes in federal guidance related to collecting gender identity information, we used a multi-step approach that relied on participants' qualitative responses rather than a single demographic question. This allowed us to assess eligibility while also giving participants the opportunity to describe their identities in their own words. As shown on this slide, we began by explaining why these questions were being asked and noted the approach was necessary because of recent executive orders and policy changes affecting how gender-related information can be collected. We first asked participants to indicate the sex they were assigned at birth, selecting from 2 required response options. We then explained that the remaining questions focused on identity and that responses were voluntary, but that they would help us ensure the appropriate inclusivity and representation within the study. Participants were asked to describe their identity in their own words, their background, their personal characteristics that they felt were relevant to the study. We also asked about their lived experience and any aspects of their identity that were important to them. Finally, participants selected the term that best represented their sexual orientation from a list of response options. The study team then reviewed these responses to determine whether participants met the identity-related eligibility criteria for the study, which focused on LGBTQ+ belonging. This approach allowed us to assess eligibility while providing participants with the opportunity to describe their identities in their own words rather than relying on predefined categories. So let's take a look at who participated in the study. Participants were predominantly female, representing approximately 75% of the sample. About 23% identified as male and 2% preferred not to answer. In terms of sexual identity, 40% identified as lesbian or gay, 32% as queer, 22% identified as bisexual, and smaller percentages identified as straight, selected don't know, or used another self-description. The average participant age was 35.5 years, with the majority of participants between the ages of 25 and 44. Overall, the sample represented a diverse group of LGBTQ+ workers across adulthood. In terms of race and ethnicity, the majority of participants identified as white, although the sample also included participants who identified as Asian, Black, African American, mixed race, American Indian, or Alaskan Native. 15% of individuals identified as Hispanic. Income levels varied, although most participants reported annual household incomes between $50,000 and $100,000 or greater. Participants represented a wide range of professional roles. Nearly half worked in analyst or associate level positions, while others held entry-level managerial, senior leadership, director, and executive roles. It was a highly educated sample. Participants also worked across a range of organizational sizes and workplace structures. One area that we were particularly interested in was work arrangement. And we did have participants represented fully on-site, hybrid, and fully remote work environments. So this was a really interesting area for us to look at. And one of the most informative questions we asked participants was what they believed contributed to their challenges with belonging at work. They were allowed to select as many of these as they wished. On average, people selected 2.5. So as you can see, given the participants, we expected sexual orientation and gender identity to be at the top. However, age, education, and income level and race were also identified as reasons they were struggling with belonging at work. And what this really showed us was that it's not necessarily one thing, but typically it's a range of factors that can influence an individual's feelings of belonging. So let's get to the outcomes. Our primary outcome measure was the Professional Fulfillment Index, or PFI. The PFI assesses 3 important aspects of workplace well-being: professional fulfillment, work exhaustion, and interpersonal disengagement. Personal fulfillment reflects positive meaning, purpose, and satisfaction at work. Work exhaustion captures physical and emotional fatigue, while interpersonal disengagement, as you probably guessed, reflects feelings of disconnection from colleagues and others in the workplace. What we found was really encouraging. Every outcome we examined, including the ones I'll show in a second, moved in the desired direction. While this is a pilot study without a control group, the consistency of the findings across workplace well-being, belonging, and resilience and mental health provides strong support for continued evaluation of the Bridges program. Professional fulfillment increased over the course of the intervention. At the same time, work exhaustion decreased substantially and indicated a lower level of burnout. And we also saw meaningful reductions in interpersonal disengagement. Our secondary outcomes included the Duke Emotional Thriving and Exhaustion Scale. This validated measure was developed by researchers at Duke University to assess workforce well-being and resilience. It includes 2 components: emotional thriving and emotional exhaustion. And emotional thriving, as you can guess, reflects positive functioning, vitality, and engagement, while emotional exhaustion captures feelings associated with burnout and depletion. And again, we observed positive changes in both outcomes. Participants reported significantly higher emotional thriving at follow-up compared to baseline, and emotional exhaustion decreased. These findings again provide additional evidence that the intervention positively influenced participants' emotional well-being and workplace experience. We also took a look at some mental health questions, including the PHQ-2 and the GAD-2. The PHQ-2 is a brief measure of depression. It's used as a screener. And the GAD-2 is a brief screener of anxiety. And again, we saw significant reductions in both depression and anxiety across the 30-day pilot program. Finally, we have 3 additional measures that were maybe less familiar to everyone. The first is the REM3, a 3-item measure of resilience that assesses positive thinking, meaning, and purpose, and meaningful social connections. The second one is the Iowa B, a 3-item measure of workplace belonging that assesses acceptance, inclusion, connection, and value within the workplace. And finally, for this program, we developed a measure of confidence in terms of how confident someone is that they can shape their workplace experiences. And as with all of our other outcome measures, they all improved significantly over the course of the intervention. Participants reported greater resilience, stronger workplace belonging, and increased confidence in their ability to influence workplace experiences. These findings are particularly encouraging because they reflect some of the core mechanisms Bridges was designed to address. So what about our 2 other major goals? Feasibility. We wanted to make sure that individuals stayed within the program, they continued to get receipt of text messages, and that they use the program online. We established a benchmark of 75% participation for success. The results exceeded our expectations. More than 99% of participants continued to receive text messages, and these were daily, throughout the intervention. 89% engaged with at least one online activity. Participants averaged more than 40 activity visits during the 1-month program, which is outstanding. So these findings clearly demonstrate that the participants were willing to engage with both the text messaging and the online components. The next question is whether participants found the program acceptable and valuable. Our primary acceptability benchmark was whether participants would recommend Bridges to another LGBTQ+ worker who might benefit from the support. Overall, the ratings were very positive. Participants rated Bridges an average of 4.09 out of 5 stars. In addition, more than 75% reported they would recommend the program to another LGBTQ+ worker. As a result, the intervention successfully met our acceptability benchmark. Finally, I just wanted to share, several people typically ask if people like getting the text messages. Is it intrusive? Are there too many? And we did ask those questions. So most participants reported that the frequency of messages was just right. Importantly, the majority also reported that they read the text messages regularly throughout the intervention. So this report shows that they found the text messages engaging and the delivery schedule was appropriate. In conclusion, Bridges demonstrated strong feasibility, high acceptability, and promising efficacy. Participants engaged with the intervention, rated it positively, and demonstrating meaningful improvements across a broad range of workplace well-being outcomes, including professional fulfillment, burnout, belonging, resilience, confidence, depression, and anxiety. So these findings suggest that digital interventions grounded in behavior change science may offer a scalable and effective approach to support workplace well-being among LGBTQ+ workers, focusing on the individual level. So what are our next steps? While organizational efforts remain essential, Bridges demonstrates that individual level interventions can play an important complementary role in helping people feel more connected, supportive, and valued at work. Thank you for your time and interest. We'll have time for questions after Emily Gallo's comments, and now I'll pass it back over to James.
Kerry, Madison, Patty, thank you so much. The level of engagement that you achieved, it demonstrates how valuable people seem to have found the content. That's just so promising. I know we'll have questions about it. All right, at this time, I would love to introduce Emily Gallo. Emily Gallo uh, Senior Vice President and General Manager of OptiFreight Logistics at Cardinal Health. She leads the creation of technology products to innovate the way healthcare supply chain leaders manage logistics and remove cost. She is the executive sponsor of the Proud Employee Resource Group. And ADOS is doubly blessed to have her as a member of our advisory board. Emily, I'm so curious, as an executive who sees the impact of belonging, the good and the bad, play itself out in real operational time, I'm curious about your reflections, both on Bridges as well as your own experiences of cultivating workplace belonging for employees.
Thank you, James. And I did want to start out by just saying how impressed I am, Kerry, with all of the work that you and the team have done. I've seen those results. I've heard you talk about it, but every time I hear you talk about it, it's pretty profound how engaged people were, how sustaining it was. And to your point, the work in a program like that is meant to complement what takes place in a corporate setting. So I can see a lot of synergy with what you shared today. So thank you. I will take the approach of talking about from a corporate lens or from a workplace standpoint, what I have experienced over the last 20 plus years in different settings and different companies. But I will start out by just saying I'm so honored and thrilled to be part of, as James said, the ADOS advisory board. The work here is critical, especially now. And I also am a member of what's called Penn Leadership Q, which is a newer alumni organization that's really designed to get after some of the things that I'm going to talk about today. So let me frame it up this way. I report to the CEO of Cardinal Health. It's a Fortune 14 company. We're based in Columbus, Ohio, and I have the joy of running a business within Cardinal Health, OptiFreight Logistics, like James said, but importantly, serving as the executive sponsor of our Proud ERG. And a lot of what I'll share today, I believe, are demonstrated best practices that I hope can spark some ideas that you can bring back to either your corporate organization if you work in the private area or those who you do collaborate with. Because I think there's a lot of good that's out there that we are managing to protect and progress year after year. So let me start out by talking about pillars of what I believe has to go into an inclusive and effective workplace environment. There are three pillars I'll talk about. The first pillar relates to top-down accountability. The second pillar relates to kind of middle-out community building, a lot through allyship. And the third pillar is really bottoms-up. What do we do on a daily basis that helps nurture and reinforce and strengthen how connected we all feel every day? So to begin, the top-down accountability piece, and James, I loved all the stats that you included at the beginning of this. I wrote down a number of them. I'll sprinkle a few during my comments here. But when I think about starting from a corporate or an executive point of view, it is really important that there's representation and that there's structural visibility that can help LGBTQ plus employees at any point in their career see what is possible and what can be supported. Right now, there's a study that was out of Out Leadership and Above Board that showed that only 0.7% of Fortune 500 companies' board seats are occupied by an open member of the LGBTQ plus community. Only 0.7%. It is really important that we can visualize ourselves, that we can see what is possible as we continue throughout our career. There's an effect that has this ceiling effect. If you can't see it, it makes it that much harder. And the concept of the cost of invisibility. There was another study that showed from Adelis and Involve that showed 42% of LGBTQ plus employees cited that the lack of a visible senior leader in the community hinders their career path. They really believe it works against what they believe is possible and the support system that we have in place. So really starting from a top-down accountability. I'm really honored and fortunate to be in an organization where I feel very supported by the C-suite and executives within our company. And not just this set of executives, but amazingly, as there's been turnover or different changes over the last decade, every time there's a bit of a walk the walk mentality that is seen and felt by employees. Doesn't mean that they have to champion every aspect, every right, every cause, every time, but the consistency of being a champion, of being transparent, and being communicative, that they are supportive of us being us and bringing ourselves to work, is a really important piece. Let's move into this middle piece. I talked about it as kind of middle out community building. Another way to talk about it is scaling active allyship through shared moments. There's June is a very special month, as we know, and I'll share a quick story. Last week, actually, it was June 2nd, right? So 2 weeks ago, technically. I live in Philadelphia, not far from Penn. I have a home office here, and I mentioned the headquarters of Cardinal Health and OptiFreight Logistics is in Columbus, Ohio. I had the pure joy of taking my 12-year-old daughter with me on a day trip to Columbus on June 2nd to raise the progress flag. And it's one of the 3 flags that we fly outside of our headquarters. It was such a special moment to have her see what it means to be part of a company with an inclusive culture. I'm going to share my screen here so you can see a quick picture of what I mean. But a lot of this middle out community building is about shared events. It's about critical mass. What you can see here, I put it into presentation mode, is the flag off to the right? There are a number of executives up through the C-suite that stand proudly as we raise the flag every year. We wrap it around a community service event, helping those in our community. A lot of people showed up, whether they're allies or identify as LGBTQ+. I had the chance to say some opening remarks and really share my story and my over the career of what it felt like to feel like I could be more open. And then top left is my favorite picture, of course, but my daughter here, who I think became my height during the trip to Columbus. But with her being 12 and getting to see what it means to experience an organization like this, I'm hoping that she and so many others really carry the expectation of that forward. So when I think about critical mass events, whether it's flag raising, marching in a pride parade, representing your organization, these things matter because it is bringing together visually so many allies, so many people that identify in the community, and those that aren't quite yet ready to be their full selves, to share with their supervisor, as James said, right? Half of employees still do not come out to their supervisors. These corporate critical mass events are really important. And it sets the stage. I'll share a best demonstrated practice. I believe that I've been really pleased to see this proud organization is our employee resource group at Cardinal Health. And about 6 years ago, we went on a full-blown campaign to put some more formal structure into the concept of allyship. There are incredible people that want to support you, don't quite know how, or don't know how to make it more formal. What we established was what we called an allyship pledge. And it included having people that wanted to learn a little bit more, complete a series of very short but meaningful educational online videos, and then go ahead and add their name as a formal ally pledge signee. And over the course of 12 months, our ambitious goal, and we didn't know if we'd get there, was to sign up 5,000 allies. And when you think about a global employee base at that time, it was about 50,000 employees. That is a very meaningful portion of the employee base to sign on the dotted line and stand with us. And based on the visibility across all types of senior leaders, the storytelling that went along, why is it important for members of their team, we ended up achieving that goal and having it be something that it became almost something that people felt left out, that they haven't signed, that they are an ally. They still wanted to join for the right reasons, but it really became not only just an opportunity, but an expectation of what it means to be in an inclusive culture. We also are approaching our employee resource group, Proud, as I mentioned, as it is a talent development and retention play where we look at the different roles, whether it's co-chair, committee chairs, and we've set up this organization almost like a company in and of itself. And we do that because we know there are opportunities to take on more responsibility, to lean in over the course of time. And we're building this bench of engaged and talented leaders that are ready then to step in when people's tenure lapse and they move on to other things. I think sometimes you have a really strong and engaged employee resource group, and it's because of the people and the moment that they're all together. And sometimes if something happens and things change, it can crumble. But if you really establish it like you would, again, with succession planning and talent planning, like you would an organization, the employee resource group can be a phenomenal asset to building this and nurturing this culture that ultimately it drives people to want to stay in the organization. The last piece that I'm going to touch on here relates to this bottoms up aspect. And there's a lot of storytelling that is involved in that. And it relates to psychological safety. It contributes to it, and it's enabled by it. If you think about employees that see these critical mass events that happen, like flag raisings or marchings, or they see our executives, or they see representation at the highest levels of an organization, that's all important. But if that employee feels like they have to hide parts of themselves or cover on a random Tuesday or on an average Tuesday, then all of it is for naught. So all three of those pillars have to work in unison. And when you think about that lower, the bottoms up component of it, it's what can we be doing on a daily basis? What can we help allies understand? Little things that can go a really long way. There was a study out of LGBT Great that found that the top two qualities of allyship in a workplace related to empathy. It's 68%, naming that as the top allyship action, followed by active listening. Those two things, which are very doable, right, as we continue to educate, support, share. And it's upon us to feel comfortable and open to engage in that dialogue. But it allows allies that opportunity, frankly, to show up as allies on a daily basis. I'm very fortunate to have members of my team across all levels that have taken a hold of this storytelling. We do a march in Columbus every June as an organization, and there are a few members of my team that they go out of their way to share with other colleagues that we have, not just inviting them to march, but sharing personally, why would it be meaningful for them that their colleague shows up? And sharing a little bit about their lived experiences, and whether that's a very visible trans member that we have within the Proud organization, several members within the trans community sharing their journey, or parents of trans kids, making sure that they are sharing and being visible, opening the door for what those questions and conversations can be is really important. So making sure that all parts of the LGBTQ plus community are represented, talked about, and shared. That's what's going to drive progress here. So in conclusion, I would say that for those that are in a more of a workplace environment, there is a lot that you can do, a lot of ideas that you can bring to drive progress, to drive change. the most important thing, if you feel safe doing it, would be really creating those bonds, finding ways to share more about your world, about your lived experiences. And in more cases than not, you'll find a listening ear, and allies are looking for ways to be visible and active. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. I know we're going to leave time for questions, whether it's for me or for Kerry and the work of her team. But James, thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I love how you highlighted the importance of representation to employees, and then are giving that representation to your daughter in showing how your company does show up for LGBTQ employees. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I'm going to invite the ProChange team to join us back on stage. And would love to invite attendees to submit questions. We've got just a little over 10 minutes where we can answer questions from folks. I also have one that I'm interested in pitching to y'all. A common theme that I heard across your presentations is sort of this gap from intention to action. Kerry, you talked about it in terms of maybe actions an employee themselves is thinking about taking, wanting to take, but doesn't quite know how to do it. Emily, you talked, I think, about allies and allyship and how often the gap is getting allies to activate from intention to some kind of action that people can, experience and witness. I'm curious if you've got thoughts. I don't know, that gap seems like a valuable place to spend some attention and effort. And I'm curious if you've got thoughts about how folks might identify that their own action or intention to action gap, either for themselves or within their organization, in a way that could help them, implement some change.
I'm happy to jump in, Emily, if that's okay to start off. So I think one of the first things you have to talk about is psychological safety, because if that is not, if someone does not feel safe within their work environment, intentions is typically as far as something may go. That being said, I was trained in the trans theoretical model. I come from a behavior change philosophy. And I think a lot of what we did in the Bridges program was to make sure that we were hitting upon all of the different core principles of change. So things like increasing knowledge, but also in terms of thinking about yourself in the future. How will this help other individuals? Stimulus control, things you can do within your environment. So really making sure that all of those were being touched upon within the intervention. So regardless of where someone was in their readiness to change, we were activating certain principles that might be important for them at that time. You're never going to be able to speak to every single person in the digital program, but you can speak to everyone at a specific time of where they are and try to capture as many people as possible. I don't think you should just expect someone to move from intentions to actions without providing them with those core building blocks.
Great response. I listening to you and thinking about what you have to wrap around intention to drive action, it does make me think of Penn Leadership Q. And I realized that I didn't explain what that was earlier, but this fits in perfectly. I know Elise Betts is on this call, and Joan Lau is a trustee for the University of Pennsylvania. The two of them really was a brainchild to create what is called Penn Leadership Q, which is designed to do just that, to take intention and drive results. The lack of representation, or I'll say the limited representation across the schools of University of Pennsylvania, their board of directors, their board of advisors, there's limited representation for LGBTQ plus individuals. And if you don't have a seat at the table, it's hard to drive more systemic change. So Joan and Elise recognized this and put into place structural support by establishing this Penn Leadership Q organization, which found me and found so many other really engaged Penn alumni that are meant to be visible, be known, and ultimately progress towards having a chance to be in those rooms, having those conversations, and affect change for the long term.
Thank you both. The next question that comes to mind is, in this moment, some folks I think wonder, is belonging a bad word? And how do you sort of leverage investment buy-in in the concept? And I'm curious from your perspectives, either framing wise or perhaps research oriented and evidence-based angles, how would you approach convincing someone that this is worth investing in?
Emily, do you want to go first?
I would say that right now in the world, we are focused on fundamentally how people feel. Are they connected? Are they supported? And James, to your other point, right? When you have an engaged workforce, there's so many pros on all fronts that can happen with that. I would say we are less focused on specific words, specific terminology, and we've essentially put more of our time and energy on what are the outcomes that we want to see and what are the steps that we're going to put in place to try to drive them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I will mention that in addition to the Bridges program, our ProChange team has been working on belonging among employees in general, the wide, full population of employees and workers. And we have a measure that we use called the Iowa B. We have that across many of our commercial clients. And through that, we have been able to see a huge correlation between that measure of belonging as well as engagement measured by attendance, sick days, and a variety of other well-established engagement measures among workers. So many of the clients that I work with prefer to use words such as engagement when they're trying to get buy-in. There are many that also prefer to use belonging. And I think Emily's point is well spoken, because really what we're looking at is that outcome, and the word, they may mean the same thing. So if we need to change the word to get buy-in or to get support, as long as we're able to help individuals with that feeling of safety and engagement, I think it's okay.
I love that. Maybe we don't need to get caught up in semantics. If we stay focused on the outcome for people, that's the most important part.
I think absolutely, but still understanding that many people do still get caught up in semantics. So having the flexibility to be able to change that when we need to is important.
Absolutely.
One thing, if I could add, I realized I never said how big this pilot was. I never said what the ultimate end was. So we did have 136 individuals start the program, and 127 completed the full month of engagement with the program and completed the follow-up assessment. So it was a 93% retention rate in the research, and it was well over 100 individuals who participated in the pilot. Which
is nigh unheard of. So again, kudos to the team for achieving that. And again, I think it speaks to the timely nature of these kinds of tools. All right, I'm going to make last call for any questions. And in the meantime, I think we're going to post a couple of links in the chat. If folks would like to learn more about the work that ADOS does, would like to subscribe to our newsletter, we'll have a few links for you to look at shortly. And I am not seeing any other questions. We did have questions about how people could watch this again, because they have valued it so much, and how they could share it with other people. But I think that we have answered the questions that have been submitted. So I'm just going to thank everyone for attending. Thank you, Kerry. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Madison. And thank you, Emily, so much for sharing your wisdom, your experience, and for providing us with a lot to think about in terms of how we can all be pursuing belonging in our own organizations. We really appreciate your time.
James, thanks for everything you've done, and for ADOS, just keep doing what you're doing. It's really important. So appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. So glad to be in partnership. All right.
Thank you so much, James, and the entire
all...
ADOS team. We really appreciate it. And happy Pride Month.
Yes, happy Pride to everyone. And I will release you to your Wednesday afternoons. Thank you so much.